On the 1st of May 2023, Vercel, the makers of Next.js, announced it was adding a brand new capability to its platform offering, Vercel Storage. Now, this added capability is going to be a big game changer for Vercel, as it means their customers can now build much more complicated applications entirely within the Vercel ecosphere. Now, when it comes to modern JS cloud hosting and continuous integration platforms, I recently created a video on the best Next.js hosting provider, and that video is referenced below if you want to watch it. Now, the reason why I bring this up is that one of the factors in that video why you might consider picking Netlify is that in general, it offers more capabilities compared to its competitors. So this got me thinking, now that Vercel has storage, does this change the conversation when it comes to picking a cloud hosting provider? So I'm going to start the video off looking at Vercel storage, seeing what it offers and seeing how easy it is to implement in code. Then I'm going to review this to what I consider is Vercel's closest competitors, which I think is Netlify, Cloudflare, and AWS Amplify. I'm going to see which offers the best cloud storage option for your cloud hosting needs. Now, one thing that you'll definitely want to store from this video is my YouTube channel in your subscription list. And you can change that right now if you haven't subscribed by smashing on the subscribe button and clicking on like if you like my videos. Now, if you haven't come across my videos, my name is John and I do a weekly video that will help you become a better web developer. So if that's of interest, you know what to do. Now let's have a look at Vercel storage in action. Now, when it comes to thinking about storage, we basically have two different needs when we're building applications. On one hand, we have things like file storage. So this is when we need to store files, images, movies, all that kind of good stuff. Now, on the other hand, we also have application data. So we might need to connect to a database, create a key value store, have feature flags, all that kind of good stuff. Now, it's because we have these two different needs that Vercel offers multiple different types of storage. The first way that you can add storage to a Vercel hosted application is basically via the marketplace. Now, in case you didn't know, Vercel has a marketplace which has loads of integrations to third parties. And just in terms of the database apps, you can see you get access to things like S3, DynamoDB, Mongo. We've got the option of CockroachDB. We've got a Postgres. We've even got Cosmos. So all in all, there's a good selection of integrations here. Now, using a third-party integration is neat. However, the real game changer with the new Vercel offering is that you can now create and store data within Vercel itself. The first of Vercel's storage types we're going to look at is Vercel KV. So KV, key value, is basically a Redis online. So Redis is basically going to be a fast, scalable, serverless data store. Now, this isn't a SQL database. It's more used for key value storage, storing JSON objects, or maybe storing HTML fragments in the cloud. As you'd expect from Redis, if you haven't come across it before, it is really fast, very easy to use, and it has a very powerful querying language behind it. Now, to get started with a brand new Vercel KV instance, you'll need to log into the Vercel interface. However, it's worth pointing out that you'll also need to install the Vercel/KV npm package. Now, in order to create a KV database, you need to log into the dashboard, and from here you can see that we've got the option of creating storage here. Now, it's also worth pointing out that if you click on a project, you can also create storage on a project level. Now, I think the main difference between the two is that once you create storage on a project, Vercel is going to set up all the environments variables for you. When you create things at the project level, you're going to have to do a bit more manual work yourself. Now, when you come to storage, you can see that we can create a database. And when we click on create database, you can see we've got our 4 options, and we'll cover these shortly. Now, just in terms of KB database, you can see that I've created one here. Now, when I click on my database, you can see that we've got the installation instructions. Now, one interesting thing that's worth pointing about the KB database is that you have no way within the UI itself of interacting with the data store, seeing what's in it, or writing values. Instead, if you want to interact with your store, you're going to have to use the command prompt, which is available from the CLI page. And from here, you can see that we can add in some terminal commands. This means you need to be a bit of a Redis whiz in order to use this service. If you are new to Redis, then my tip to you is that instead of struggling with the query language, it'll be much easier for you to work with a GUI tool. Now, the tool that I've predominantly used to work with Redis over the years is Redis Desktop Manager. Now it's changed names a bit, but you can download it for free or clone it from GitHub from the Redis Insight desktop manager. Now the great thing about this manager is that all it will do is ask you to connect to your Redis server using your connection details. Then once you've connected, you can actually see all of your databases and all the values inside those databases. From here, you can then update your data, edit it, delete it, or do whatever. And it's much easier interacting with your store like this than it is trying to query everything, trust me. So far, things are looking good, but what's it like to implement all of this in code? Now, the good news is, again, it's pretty super simple. After we've imported the npm package, all we need to do is get access to create client. Now, depending on how you're accessing your store, if you're doing it via environment variables, you're going to be passing in a different access token. However, I wanted to do things manually, so you can see from here, I can pass in my URL and token. Now, after I've created a client, you can see that I can do a HGE tool, and this is basically a Redis query. See what I mean by it's a bit funky? And then we can pass in the information that we want to query for. Now, in case you're wondering where I got the URL and token for, the easiest way to get this that I've found within the UI is that if you go to your env local, you can show secrets and you can copy everything from this page here. The second option is Vercel Postgres, which is basically Cloud SQL Server, and it also has a pretty interesting story. Now, Vercel Postgres is built on Neon, and on the Vercel website, they claim that their SQL offering is the first serverless SQL database built for the cloud. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly what that means, as Neon has been around for a while, and it's also possible to create cloud-powered SQL databases in other instances, so maybe it's just marketing hype, but there you go. The third type of storage is Vercel Blob, which can be used to store things like files, images, videos. You can kind of think of it as Vercel's version of S3. One interesting thing to know about Vercel Blob storage is that it uses Cloudflare R2 under the hood. Now, we're going to get into Cloudflare storage later in the video. However, it's interesting they use a direct competitor's infrastructure and also admit it. Finally, we have Vercel Edge Config, which kind of surprisingly is another key value storage option that Vercel offers. Now, the difference with this option is the storage in the Edge config lives in the Edge network, meaning it's very low latency and quick. Edge config was released in November 2022, so it's been around a lot longer compared to its brothers and sisters. Vercel Edge config kind of feels like the forgotten love child right now, because with this brand new Vercel storage offering, there is no mention about how KV compares with Edge config at all. Now, a few of you might be wondering, what's the main differences between these two different types of key value storage? Well, let's have a look. Now, first off, to get started with Edge config in code, you'll need to install a different npm package, which is the Vercel-Edge config. Now, again, you'll be creating your storage within the dashboard. So create database, you can see that we have Edge config. Now, when it comes to Edge config, when we click on here, you can see straight away that we actually get access to our store. And then I can update my store within the UI. So I can say, here's John, here's my test value, off we go. Now, the next thing I want to mention is how do we actually access our store? Now, again, if you connect your store with a project, everything's going to be taken care of for you using Vercel CLI. However, if you want to do things manually, we can go to our tokens, we can create ourselves a brand new token, and then if we click on these ellipses here, you can see that we can do copy connection string. And all we need to do is use this connection string in code to get going. Now, in terms of what the code looks like, again, it's pretty simple. All we need to do is import create clients. However, this time from our Edge config package, you can see that we can pass in that connection string that we copied into create clients. And then in order to just query things, we can do a config.get. Doing this is then going to result in data being returned. So you can see that we've got our example John test here, and that relates to the John test here. If I now update this value, then save it, if I refresh my page, you'll see that it now updates. So let's quickly summarize the differences between these two different stores and when you want to use them. So as you've seen, Edge config is super simple. You can update it in the UI and it's perfect for storing simple key value stuff. Now, edge config is super fast because all the data is automatically copied into the edge network and it'll be located all across the world. Now, if you need something more complex, that's when you want to use KV. Now, KV will only be created in a single data center across the world, so it is going to be slightly slower. However, it's still really, really quick. Now, as you've seen, in order to work with KV, you'll need to understand some of the syntax around Redis and its querying language, and you'll probably likely need to use an additional tool. So if you're building a proper enterprise level tool, you need caching, you need to store HTML fragments, use KV. The good news is that all of these services are offered on both Vercel's Pro and Hobby plans. This means you can use Blob, KV, Postgres or Edge config for completely free, and the only way that you're going to have to pay for anything is if you hit a usage cap. All in all, I'm extremely impressed with the new Vercel storage offering. It will allow you to store any type of data you want, the pricing is very reasonable, and the code to get going, again, is super simple and very well documented. So let's see how this now compares to some of its other competitors. So the first competitor we're going to compare Vercel to is Cloudflare. Now, Cloudflare is known for their CDN. However, they also do edge workers and they also do two different types of storage. So they do KV storage and they also do R2 storage. Now, there are two interesting things to point out around this service. First, do not compare Cloudflare KV to Vercel KV because they're different things. Second, remember that Vercel Blob Storage also uses R2 under the hood. Now, in terms of direct comparisons, Cloudflare KV is probably a bit more like Vercel Edge config, where you can log into the UI, you have access to a key value pair, which you can then use to access and code via a REST API. Now, thinking about how KV stacks up with Edge config, I'll probably say that Edge config wins a little bit. Now, the reason for this is around the SDK. Now, with Cloudflare, yes, they offer you an API. You can also update and write data to KV using Wrangler, which is the Cloudflare CLI tool. Now, in order to get going with Cloudflare API, you'll have to go into your Cloudflare account, go to the API tokens, create yourself a token, then add that as a bearer token when you're making any API request. Now, there's no JavaScript wrapper around this API. This means that you'll have to use the native JavaScript fetch rather than be able to use the JavaScript SDK like you can with Vercel. Now, the good news is that you don't have to work with the API directly if you don't want. Some good soul called Zerts has actually created an npm JavaScript wrapper for the API. So you can get access to this package by installing Cloudflare-KV. Now, working with this package, super simple. All you need to do is set some environment variables, set account ID, token, and namespace ID, which you can get from Cloudflare. Then in order to access the store, we just get access to this Cloudflare KV object. From here, we can then just do a get, passing it in our key to get our value. Now, in a perfect world, I would have ideally liked to see Cloudflare create this package for me. Now, the reason why I say this is that great, an enthusiast has created it, but if that guy gets hit by a bus, that means I'm going to have to completely repackage if things break. So not having officially supported NPM packages is a pretty big bugbear for mine, and this is the reason why I favour Vercel Edge config over Cloudflare KV. The second type of storage offered by Cloudflare is known as R2 storage, and this can kind of be compared to Amazon's AWS's S3. In it, you can basically store unstructured data like files, videos, all that kind of good stuff. Now, the one thing about R2 that Cloudflare likes to mention is that it's got zero egress fees whatsoever. And because of this zero egress fees, Cloudflare thinks it's one of the cheapest ways for you to use cloud storage possible. Now, in case you're wondering how much this costs, the good news is that you can access all these features like Vercel in the free tier. So you can see you get workers for free, you get KV for free, so basically 1 gigabyte of storage space per month. Then for R2, you can see that you get a storage of 10 gigabytes per month and 1 million read access. So all in all, I'll say that Cloudflare's free tier is pretty generous. Now, all I'd say is that Cloudflare doesn't have that SDK, also doesn't offer any type of SQL capabilities, so I'll leave you to make your own mind which is a better service. AWS Amplify provides customers with two means of storage, file storage and data storage. And in terms of file storage, you can basically use the legendary S3 bucket that I'm pretty sure you've heard of. Now, in terms of normal application data, you can basically use a NoSQL database, which will be backed by Amazon DynamoDB. Now, just like Vercel, it's possible to access your data via REST API or either a Lambda function. Now, Amplify doesn't really offer SQL storage natively. However, because you're in AWS, you can create yourself an Amazon Aurora SQL database, which is basically Postgres, and you can connect and wire things up yourself manually using a Lambda function. Now, Amazon has created step-by-step guides that can be found for the related tutorial below that basically detail how to wire these services up together. The good news is, just like Vercel, the Amplify team have also released their SDK wrapper on top of the data store APIs. This means if you want to interact with this in your JavaScript code, it's super simple. Now, even though you have the same capabilities as Vercel, I think the setup with Amplify is way more complex in general. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to use, however, there's definitely more steps and hurdles to jump through compared to the ease of Vercel, which is super simple. Now, typically, whenever I've created a video which has got Netlify and Vercel in it, the typical end result will be that Netlify either has the same capability as Vercel or offers something slightly more advanced. However, this statement is no longer true when we compare things with storage. Now, Netlify definitely lacks in its storage offering. Netlify offers basically large blob storage. The large media offering will take any large item that you add and then host it and minimize it for you for performance gains. This service is kind of like what Git large file storage offers. Now, Netlify does offer an integration and plugin network. This means you can use or create storage in your application. However, as you can see from this integrations list, the database integrations are pretty limited to only 2 options. Now, if you and me were just having a conversation about cloud hosting capabilities, Netlify comes in super strong. However, storage definitely is its weakest kink in its armor. In terms of storage, yes, it has large media based on that Git LTS stuff. However, aside from that, you'll be looking to a third party to do any type of storage. And for me, if you're actually trying to do some very data-powered, intensive things, then Netlify is probably the worst option out of this list in terms of inbuilt capabilities. Now, before we get to the conclusion, it's probably worth pointing out that I'm getting paid no money, no sponsorship by any of the companies that I'm reviewing in today's video. Everything that I'm doing here is my personal opinion, and even if you look in my YouTube history, you'll find videos where I say that certain providers are better than others. However, as I think it's clear from this video, Vercel is definitely a clear winner when it comes to storage. Now, it's come completely out of the blue, but its service is pretty good. By far, it's the most feature-rich capability. So it's got great integrations, the KV thing really easy to use, it's got Redis support, it's got SQL. Basically, if you need to do any type of file storage or application data storage in your JavaScript React powered project, then Vercel is a great option for you. And the great thing is that the free tier is probably going to cover everything that you need as well. Now, Amplify is also great and it has lots of options. However, the setup is a little harder, and the second issue is pricing. Now, yes, one of my big bugbears around AWS Amplify is its pricing model, and it's one of the reasons why I don't really use the service that much. So we're on the AWS pricing website, and you can see we can get started for free. Yep, get started for free. Now, when we scroll down, what you'll see is we can host an app for free, but for 12 months only. And then if we look down, you can see that after our free 12-month serve, then we're going to go to the pay-as-you-go pricing. So what you'll see here is that we've got our build and deploy by 0.1 minutes. We've got our data storage for 0.023 gigabytes per month, blah, 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 blah. Now, the great thing about Vercel is its free tier is free. You can build a hobby project, you can do whatever, and you don't need to worry about that in 12 months you need to pay for anything. And personally, I really think that Amplify not providing this free for life tier basically means that a lot of developers avoid using it altogether. Now, if we're thinking third place, it's definitely got to be Cloudflare. R2 with its KV support, really good. Finally, due to its lack of capabilities, we have Netlify. So, as I mentioned, in my opinion, Vercel storage is probably the best option on the marketplace now, and for me, it's going to make it much more difficult when it comes to picking Netlify or Vercel moving forward. Now, what do you think? Can you see yourself using Vercel storage, or are you going to use an alternative? It'd be really interesting to know if you think it's good or bad in the comments below. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have created a review over Netlify, Vercel and GitHub pages before storage came out. And the link to that video is on the screen right now. So if you want to check that out, I recommend you click on that. Otherwise, I hope you're having an amazing time wherever you are in the world. And until next Sunday, happy coding.